Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your host, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. And we are both glad you are joining us today. And we hope that you find today's conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you lead students in ministry. First of all, we want to remind you about our social media. You can follow us at Talk Student Men on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. See all of our conversations and our podcast and show notes at our website, studentministryconversations.org. And if you are on the Clubhouse app, we host 2 rooms every week, one on Monday and one on Thursday. And so we would love for you to connect with us and join us there as well. Today, we're going to hear an interview with Daniel Acton, and he shares a little bit about student ministry leadership. And so, Brent, since this was your talk, can you tell us a little bit about your conversation today?
Yeah, so Daniel Acton is the student ministries director at Fairhaven Church. And he is a multi-church, multi-campus pastor, youth pastor. But it was really, really refreshing to kind of talk to him about this, because it doesn't matter if you're in a youth ministry of 10, it doesn't matter if you're in a youth ministry of 2,000, you can still have a vibrant and growing and active student leadership team if you have everything in place to do one. And so this conversation was just kind of talking through the basics of student leadership, what we expect from them, how they can serve not only the youth ministry, but the church as a whole, and then what this means for the rest of their lives. Like, how do they take what they've learned in student ministry and student leadership and apply it to the rest of their lives and have it grow them as a person and an individual for their future as well. And so great conversation. I was really, really encouraged by it.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and I'm hoping that everyone else is looking forward to it as well. So without any more delay, here is Brent's conversation with Daniel Acton.
All right, guys. Welcome back to Student Ministry Conversations. My name is Brent Aiken. Today, we're sitting in with Daniel Acton. Daniel is a youth pastor. He's been in the game for quite a while, and Daniel has a lot of experience in many different fields, but the specific field that we're talking about today is going to be student leadership. And so, Daniel, before we get going, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're a youth pastor, your experience in youth ministry, and any other fun details that you want to tell us?
Yeah. So thanks for having me on, Brent. Appreciate the opportunity to hang out today. Like you said, my name's Daniel. I've been in student ministry since I was a freshman in college, so I don't know if I'm willing to say it's like a crazy amount of time. But I've been doing student ministry on and off a little bit. Right now, I'm in Southwest Grand Rapids area, so Hudsonville is kind of a suburb there. But we're a multi-site church here in GR, and I've been here since November. It's been super cool. Moving from kind of like a small, medium-sized church to a church size that I've never even attended before, which has been an interesting transition, especially with multi-site and weird complications that come with that. But it's been awesome. I work with a really cool team. It's been really cool. Other interesting stuff about me, my ultimate fun fact that, like, every time you go to a new place, they do the 2 truths and a lie. My fun fact that I have every time is I played in a folk band in high school, like a folk rock band, because I graduated high school in 2014, right when like Lumineers and Mumford and Sons, like all that granola, like folk rock was a big thing. So we were just a rip off of that. So I played banjo and mandolin in a folk rock band in high school. And the best part was we won a Battle of the Bands competition, right before we went off to college. And the prize for winning Battle of the Bands was what we opened for Dennis D. Young of Styx. Like, whoa. So it was like I'm playing banjo in front of Mr. Roboto. Like,
wow.
So yeah, that's the big thing for me.
That blows mine away. Mine has always been that I got to play hacky sack with Skillet.
18-year-old Daniel got his head too big too quick, I think.
It happens to the best of us. So, that's a hard 2 truths and a lie to top, man. That's pretty good. So, obviously with the conversation today, we're gearing it towards student leadership. So I guess for youth pastors, young and old, experienced and inexperienced, why is student leadership so important?
Yeah. So when I think about why we're doing student leadership, at least in my context, our church is all about this phrase of helping people find their way back to God, right? So for me, I try to figure out, when I think of like a student's progression from like 6th to 12th grade, like where do I want them to be? Like what are the things that I want them to be thinking about? What are the things I want them to be doing? And like, how are they going to be interacting in the world? So for me, a lot of that is, how do I want students to be serving in some way? It's a high priority for me, because I think that when we serve, we are connected with something that's way bigger than ourselves. I have this quote in my office at church from a Bible nerd named Frederick Buechner. It's your vocation. I like to call it calling instead of vocation, but your calling in life is where the world's deep sadness and your calling, your vocation in life is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So like part of my calling is to like help students find theirs. And I love student leadership because like that's the ultimate like intersection of that, because it's not just like students being small group leaders, right? It's students being able to find that intersection for them. It's developing students in a way that's kind of different than other stuff that we do. When I think about calling and I think about students finding their way back to God, I think of students who are finding areas where they're able to find that intersection of where their deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So for us, what it looks like is having students finding an area to serve in. That's kind of their short term. What does that look like? And that's like the process of them figuring that out. So like we have students who are small group leaders. We're in the process of kind of like revamping and rebuilding and reshaping our student leadership program, to the point where I don't even know if I want to call it student leadership anymore. More of this idea of like student service team, right? Just like students who are willing to put themselves into a servanthood position. And it's important because like it models what Jesus does. Right. It models like his first posture is service towards other people. So what I want to do, I want to create a culture where students are being able to serve one another and be able to serve their peers, serve other people in our church as well. So when I think of like, why is it important? It's like, dude, we're following the model of Jesus. We're developing disciples that are able to continue to make disciples in the future. And we're able to do that by intentionally like speaking into them and showing them how to lead and giving them instruction of how to lead in whatever the area they are, whether it's small group leading, whether it's helping with check-in, or whether it's helping in nursery or helping somewhere else in our church, or being intentional about the way that they lead when they're at school, or the way that they lead when they go off to college, or being able to develop in them a servant heart. So I know that's kind of like a long, windy way of answering your question, but you'll find over the course of the next hour, that's kind of how I think. So
no, that's really good. And I like how you said the whole mindset of like, we're training people and instructing them how to lead. And I think that's one thing that like the church has really, really struggled with over the past couple decades, is like we're really, really good about bringing people to Christ, and then we kind of just drop the ball, and like the discipleship and leadership factor after that really, really drops. And so I think that's a big deal with student leadership, is it's one of those things that it's like, we're not just getting them to lead something in our group or anything like that. We're teaching them to be leaders in their communities. We're teaching them to be leaders in their future possessions and their future families and their future jobs or whatever. Like, and so there's great benefit behind that. But that was awesome. I love the quote too. That's one of my favorite quotes of all time. But yeah, so how, for a youth pastor that might have not developed a student leadership team yet, how can a youth pastor work to develop student leaders? Because I know there's a lot of sometimes hesitancy, because maybe you might think that you know the kids well, but like, what if the student leaders mess up or something like that? Or what if you don't pick good student leaders? Or like, I want student leadership, but I don't have any jobs for them to do, or something to that nature. So how would you suggest they start to develop those student leaders?
I think it ultimately comes down to knowing where your students are and knowing what are the things that you want to accomplish, right? It's easier, I think, in some degree, to think that like what student leadership is this this big team of really awesome teenagers who are just knocking it out, who are killing it every single week, who are doing the ministry. But I think we just need to kind of keep our expectations in check of like what it is that we can do right here. I think sometimes there's a there's a famous book that like has influenced a lot of like, at least the way I think. It's called Good to Great, right? It's a very popular business book. But I think an easy trap to fall into if you're like a perfectionist type is that you hear this quote of good can be the enemy of great. But more often than not, of what I'm thinking recently, as I'm trying to like figure out the world that I'm in and the students that I lead and the team that I lead, man, I would take good over nothing any day. You know what I mean? Like almost like a managing of expectations type idea. It's like, yeah, we can settle for something that's just okay in lieu of something that's amazing. But dude, if the option is we're either going to have something that's messy and good, or we're not going to have anything at all, I'll take messy and good all day long. You know what I mean? So I think when we think about like starting from scratch, or maybe if you're a youth pastor who is taking over from somebody who might have burned some bridges, right? And you're wanting to start a leadership team, I think something that's really important to remember is that when we are doing student leadership, that it's something that comes from a place of humility and servanthood. It's easy for us to create student leadership teams that are cliquey and that are like, if I can be very blunt, our student leadership teams can look like a lot of elder boards at unhealthy churches, right? Where it's like, it's this old guard, right? And before you know it, your student leadership can fall into that same trap that maybe either your church elder board or your church deacon board or just whatever, an unhealthy leadership structure. The way of Jesus is getting the people who are seen as the highest on the totem pole, if you will, and those people are the ones who are serving. I mean, I saw a quote just earlier this afternoon, earlier this morning, from a worship pastor at one of our campuses. It was talking about like, man, I think about what I would do if I had one day to live. And you hear about people saying like, man, I would go skydiving. What's that old country song? You know, Rocky Mountain climbing,
yeah.
and you know, whatever. We would do all these crazy things, but Jesus knew what his last day was, and he chose to serve and wash each other's feet. That's the kind of leader that I want in my student ministry. So when we think about like developing a team, maybe for the first time, look for the students who are serving and aren't really and maybe not even desiring any kind of social hierarchy or any kind of like climbing on a social ladder, with this really, really grounding understanding of it's going to be messy. I have a different set of expectations for my student leaders than I do for my adult leaders because they're students, right? Like it's okay if they mess up. And in fact, the fact that they mess up makes it so it's a little more real. Because my adult leaders mess up too in their own unique ways. But like, you know, I'm starting the process at this particular church of writing out what expectations are for my student leaders. And for me, my expectations are you're committed here, but at the end of the day, like this is a place where we can forgive one another. Right. I hope this is speaking into your question a little bit, because I know I have the tendency of kind of going on rabbit trails a little bit, but it's just so important to me that we remember that like student leaders are still students, and like students who are serving on our teams like aren't super Christians. If anything, that just like creates this culture of anxiety that I just don't want in my ministry. I don't want any part of that. I don't want to create a leadership team or a service team of students who are so afraid of messing up and like being open about that and being open about their messiness, that it creates a toxic culture of like, if my youth pastor finds out I messed up, I'm going to be kicked off the team. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. But there are certain expectations that we do have, right? Like one of the expectations that I'm writing in for this next round is like, hey, how about we refrain from using profane speech when we're online, right? So whether that's TikTok or whatever, like, hey, let's not do anything that's inappropriate online. If you do, I'm going to pull you aside. I'm going to talk to you about it and maybe ask you to take a video down, but you're still on the team, man. Like I'm not going to say like, you have to stop being a small group leader because you said the B word online once. Like, dude, people are messy. Students are messy. That's the nature of the game. And we have to be okay with students messing up every once in a while. The goal is progress, not perfection, right? Is there anything else I can speak into that? Maybe that's a little more clear, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think that's good. Going back to your original point of the whole good to great and saying, you'd rather have good or a messy good than nothing. And I think that's the starting step. I mean, you have to have something established before you can transpire to have great things. And so you have to start somewhere. And I think that's a good deal with that is, you can have the messy student leadership where they might not all be perfect. They might not all have their bells and whistles in a row and stuff like that. But there's grace there for them to try. And there's grace there for them to get better at their craft or their leadership style or where they are serving, etc. And then as they grow, you can establish more and more, hey, you're getting older, you're getting more mature now. So I expect more from you. And those expectations can step up. Those expectations can grow with them. And the thing is like, that's one of the things is we have, at least in our youth program, we have different leadership roles in our group that can only be done at certain ages. Like for instance, we have a part of our leadership team is our worship team. And so our youth worship team is high school only. And it's not that there aren't talented junior high players, but it's when we're fostering a state of worship for our group, we want kids that are going to actually be devoted and practice and pay attention and be there, be able to actually drive and travel to practices and stuff like that. We want them to be able to be independent enough that they can actually be dedicated and devoted to what they're doing. Now, we also have opportunities for junior high to where it's like, hey, your job is you don't make people like your goal for Wednesday nights is no one is alone. And a junior high kid can take that and run with it and tackle it. And that involves a whole different set of the whole messy grace that we can allow because they might mess up on occasion. And it's like, that's fine. Worship might mess up on occasion, but it's a different level of leadership. And it's something that I see as kind of an evolving process. Like your ability to lead grows with you. And so I had a senior this year teach the 6th grade small group. It was our first time to do it and it was fantastic, but I would have never let a freshman teach the 6th grade group. It's going to be an upperclassman every day of the week, but it's because they have that experience and they have the little bit more of life experience to be mature when the situation calls for being mature and to be the leader that those young kids can look up to that are like, oh man, they're just a few years older than me. So I think that's super, super good. In your context, I know that you're saying more kind of student leadership is a messy area and like you offer grace and in those realms, but what specific jobs, if any, do you put on your student leadership team?
Yeah. So like I said, we're kind of in a season transitioning. I mean, like I've only been here since November, but something that we're launching in the fall. So I'll kind of give you where we are right now and where we're hoping to launch. And y'all can, anybody who's listening to this podcast can probably hold me too if I actually pull this off in the fall. So who knows? Right now, we just have juniors and seniors who are student leaders. And what's great about that is that they're all middle school small group leaders. And that's killer. That's super cool. I love that we have so many high school upperclassmen who are involved in the lives of our middle school students. There's so many wins there. But a problem that I've been able to see already is that not every person is made to be a small group leader. I really believe that student ministry is a space that anybody that it's appropriate for them to serve can serve in student ministry. It's the one area of church where I really think that anybody can be serving in some capacity. Obviously with like background checks, the whole thing, safety. And I think the same thing is true for high school students and middle school students. I think that everybody needs to be serving. Well, let me go back to like kind of why we do student leadership and student serving. The reason why I do student leadership in the first place is to help people find like their calling and to find and use their gifts. And man, I don't know about you, Brent, but like there's nothing that burns me out more than having to be committed to something that I'm not gifted in, right? So like if I've got a student leader right now who is not gifted in small group leading, that is an obligation to them. That is not a servanthood, right? But there are so many other areas that our students could be serving in that would be something that's actually life-giving, something that they're able to find this like deep hunger within them. So in the fall, what we're shooting for is to open this up to middle school and high school students. In our context, it's kind of weird. There's multiple school systems that feed into our church, but two big ones. And one of them starts middle school in 6th grade and the other starts it in 7th grade. It's a blast for middle school ministry. But with that being said, our student ministry starts in 6th grade. Our student leadership starts in 7th, if that makes sense. So like, that's just kind of the way we set it up. And in order for a student to like be a part of the team, it's something that their small group leader or another adult leader is like, for lack of a better term, it's nominate them, but a more reality, like real part of it is like, small group leaders, are there students in your group who you see have a servant heart? And if you do, give me their name, right? And like, what I love about that is that like I get to make a really awesome phone call to a 7th grade boy next week saying like, dude, both of your small group leaders said that you have a heart for service and I would love to help you grow in that. The phrase "I see in you" is so important, especially for middle school students. So like we set our student service team up in a way that students can serve in areas that they're gifted in and find out the areas they're gifted in, with like the boundary of, hey, we're probably not going to have high school freshmen leading middle school small groups. It's something that they can grow into. But like, I think about this 7th grade boy in particular, who I'm going to be calling next week. This kid, I mean, like he's messy, but he's got a really big heart. So like, I already see him being a killer check-in leader or like a really awesome, like hospitality leader, in his future. My philosophy of student leadership is anywhere that we have adult leaders, students can be there as well. Anywhere that anybody is leading, a student can be there as well. My previous church, we were able to have a teaching team that multiple adults were on, and we had a high school junior in there as well. And he knocked it out of the park. Like he would preach on a regular occasion and like I would help him with it. We had a really good student worship band that we had full of student leaders. And that's going to be the same story here. Where adults are serving, students will be serving alongside. Sometimes in more of a mentoring role, adult leaders would be like mentoring our student leaders. And sometimes in a really high capacity leading role. I've got a few students in mind next year who I can see being the main small group leader for their middle school group. I've got one girl right now who's taken the reins of her 7th grade small group for the rest of this year because the adult who is leading it is having a baby next week. So for the rest of the summer, this girl who's about to graduate is going to be taking the rest of the small group, and she's going to kill it because she has that kind of leadership in her. I'm just bummed that she's graduating and that she's not sticking around.
Right.
And
That is the bad side of youth ministry. It's like, oh, you're so great.
Paradox of the great paradox of good student leadership and good student ministry is that by the time that you really, really love the student, and then by the time that they've really matured and grown in their faith, it's about the time that they're supposed to be leaving. This particular student's going to college down the road, but they don't let freshmen have cars. So I'm like, darn. Like, I was like, all right, we'll send you off. Well, we'll make sure that we go visit you and stuff, but like, it's a major bummer.
Yeah. No, the senior girl that I have that's leading, she's actually going to college in town. And it's one of those things that I'm like, I mean, is it being selfish that like I want her to come back and like keep helping, or like should I like encourage her to get plugged in the college that she's going to? Like, so no, I totally get it. And I mean, that's a good point though, is we have to kind of, especially in leadership, take ourselves out of the equation.
Oh yeah.
Because as you said, by the time that they're actually getting to the point to where we can trust them and like we really, really see growth in their leadership skills, they're leaving. And it's a very painful process if you make it about yourself.
Yep.
Because you're like, every single time this happens, like, why does this have to happen?
I think part of that is just remembering like what the game we're playing, right? It's so easy to get caught up. I think student ministry, it's a hard game when we think about that stuff. And this might be veering away from student leadership plays a huge role in this, but like whether it's like students getting baptized or taking the next step in their faith, a lot of the times we will see maybe other student ministries, or we'll even compare it to our own student ministry experience. And we'll say, man, like our students, by the time they graduate, should be getting baptized. They should be leading a small group. They should be ready to go to college with this really strong faith. And it's like we're trying to do 50 years of discipleship in 6 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, granted, that's 6 very formidable years that they're able to make a lot of really awesome decisions and have really, really like very formidable years. But I think a lot of it is just like giving ourselves a break a little bit and understanding that like, dude, they do not have to make every decision while they're here.
Yes.
Like take that pressure off your like youth pastor who's listening to this, take that pressure off yourself, because like at the end of the day, like you're playing a 50-year game here. Your job is to allow to set students up well to be able to have a life of faith. It's not so they can get baptized at camp this summer. That's an awesome thing. Like, but I intentionally like, I do not put down like I want X amount of students to be baptized or whatever. Like I don't do that because that's not a very healthy measurement. Because dude, if I wanted to, I could definitely get 50 students baptized this summer. But do you know what would happen? The following summer, all those students would probably get baptized again because they didn't get what it was, right?
Yep.
Or like I would be preaching a gospel I don't believe in. At the end of the day, our job is to help form students in a way that gives them a life full of faith. And they can do that. And like, we are a guide by the side on that one, right? We get the honor of like holding these like students, like these really precious students in our hands for just a brief moment. And we can guide them along this really confusing time in their lives. And it's not our job for them to make every decision. And like in student leadership, man, like it's really easy for us, back to the messiness conversation. It's so easy for us to say like, by the time that there's this age, they should be doing X, Y, and Z. It's like, dude, like they have other things. Like our job is just help them grow as leaders and like help them see who Jesus is in that. But
yeah,
man, it is so easy to get caught in that trap.
It's really easy to get caught in that trap. And I think really one of the only things that in, at least in my mind, in student ministry, that you can like plan out and say, hey, like I want them to know and accomplish this by the end of their time here, is the curriculum and what you're teaching them. And that's really one of the only like constant staples that like, it doesn't matter how they progress or it doesn't matter what decisions they make. You still can lay out that roadmap that they can have as far as lessons and stuff that go, but you can't say, well, they're going to decide to follow Jesus by their 8th grade year. No, right. That's not going to happen. It could be 20 years down the road. Who knows? In the last conversation I had, for this podcast, we talked about how, it's really, really damaging if we don't have boundaries for ourselves, but it's also, we have to have boundaries for what we put as our requirements or what we put as our goals for student ministry.
Absolutely.
And that falls in line with what we expect from the students, how we expect our students to lead and everything. Like, we can't put a timestamp on them getting baptized or making that acceptance of faith, because it's not there. That's not what student leadership is. And we can't put that on them, but we can teach them to be better than they were. Mm-hmm. And we can teach them to make steps towards God and their faith.
Yeah, I love the language that Kenny and Elle from Stuff You Can Use. They use it in their curriculum. They say, like, we win when an adult leader or a student takes a next step in their faith. And like, that's what it is, right? And like, that's something that for me, I don't know, that has taken a lot of anxiety off my shoulders of like, whether it's like hitting this imaginary number of like students doing X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, my goal is just for every student to take one step, whatever the next step is. And that trail that they're walking on is endless, right?
Yeah.
But my job is to help them put their next step forward and providing whatever it is for them. And then in the context of student leadership, like, they've probably taken a few steps in their faith before they get to a student leadership area. But the steps that they take while they are like in a servant position are really, really honoring steps that I get to be a part of, right? Like the step of faith of like being able to now help other students and their peers take the next step in their faith.
Yes.
That is a huge, fun step to be a part of, right?
Yeah.
From like my perspective, like as a leader of leaders, that's one of the most like energizing parts of my job, is to like empower other students to help their friends find and follow who Jesus is. It's super cool.
100%. Okay. So we've kind of really hit the nail on the head with the whole like developing student leaders within our youth groups and everything like that. But how does student leadership transition into the bigger church?
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, students who are serving don't have to just be in our ministry. It's so easy for us to create our own little church within a church. And it's easy for us to fall on that trap because it's what we're doing, right? Like student ministry in of itself is a wild gig. It's like a mixture of like church planter and youth worker and social worker all in the same thing, right? Because we are doing the program week in, week out, and we're also doing the discipleship work, and we're also fill in the blank. It's easy for us to kind of get blinded by the other things. But man, it is just as much a win for me as some student in my team, like in my ministry, is serving in our kids' ministry as if they're serving in ours. And like, you know what? Those students are on my team. Like, those are the students that I want on my team. A student service team or a student leadership team, whatever you want to call it, doesn't mean that they're serving in your ministry. It means that they're serving. They're helping other people find their way back to God in some way. So like, again, right now I'm kind of in like vision phase of like what I want our student leaders to be. So like none of this is in practice yet. So like, don't hold me to this, but like I envision our particular ministry having student leaders who are leading fourth grade small groups, having student leaders who are in the worship band on Sunday morning, and not just on Sunday evening, or maybe not even on Sunday evening at all. Students who are serving. That's it, right? Student leaders serve, and they find, and like we help them find areas where they can. If I'm serious about what I say when I want students to find where their deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet, man, we've got a church full of opportunities for them to do that. And like my job goes into connecting and networker mode, right? It's like, okay, well, who are the people that I know in our church who are really passionate about what this student's passionate about? How can I connect these two people, right? How can I get this student who during camp was really impacted by the fact that he's now knowing that there are other people in our area who have trouble, who are food insecure, right? It's like, well, I'm going to connect him to our food pantry ministry, or I'm going to connect him maybe to the other organization in town that does it better than we do, right? Or has something that we don't. Or fill in the blank. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to like having students like within our like leadership culture, we have to not be afraid of when they break out of our youth group, right? Our goal is for students to help put the world back together, right? And it's kind of an all hands on deck thing. I believe that students can serve anywhere in the church. And a lot of my job is to help them find those places and be an advocate for them when they're doing it. And also helping so like another example is if I have a student who is like on our adult worship team, part of my job then becomes to help the worship leader who may or may not have student ministry experience, help them and coach them in some way, in a very small way, of like, hey, this is what it looks like to lead a student versus an adult. Like, these are two very different things. Like, this is going to be messy, but it's going to be the most beautiful kind of messy. So like part of your job is to become an advocate for them and to help those who are in those leadership positions to like understand that and have grace with the students when they mess up, and to also meet with those students when they do, or as they are serving. It's not an easy job, man. Like, it's not easy to have students serve outside of your own ministry. But I can't think of a better way for students to find their way back to God. Yeah. I can't think of a better way for I'll explain my language a little bit. I use this phrase that the Bible is the story of God putting his family back together. And I think the craziest part of that story is that you and I and every student in our ministry plays a role in that. And I can't think of a better way for students to help put the world back together than to serve in areas outside of our own ministry. Because newsflash, our ministry ain't it. You know, like as much as it might be our whole world right now, it definitely isn't. So, man, I'm going to be an advocate for when students are wanting to branch out, or maybe students are gifted in other ways other than mine. And it's 100% more work, but like, that's the kind of work that I signed up for. You know, that's what we're in the game for.
Yeah. Well, and the beauty behind that as well is if we have them just serving in our student ministry, then when they leave student ministry, that's all they know.
Yep.
And if they're serving on the Sunday morning worship team and they're killing it in drums or guitar or whatever, then they have that and they can translate that into the rest of their lives. They translate that into multi-church serving. They translate that into multiple opportunities to where they can get out of their like all about me zone and serve the bigger church. And so helping with children's ministry, helping with the praise band, helping with all these different things, like getting them and pushing them out of your program to serve in other areas of the church. I mean, that should be our primary goal. It's not that we don't need them in our group, but I have to throw Russell and his name out for a little bit, because he did one of the coolest things. Like, he kind of did the same thing with you, and he had a lot of high school kids teaching junior high groups. But then like he had another night set aside to where all the high school leaders came together to have their opportunity to be filled. So you can set up different opportunities so they're not missing out. Mm-hmm. They're not like the elite group or anything like that, but you set aside a night for them as well so they can continually be filled, because like you said, we're an advocate for those student leaders. And that means that our job and our responsibility and our priority is not only to direct them in how they and where they can lead, but it's also to make sure that they stay on top of being filled.
Yeah, man. That's why I think it gets messy. That's another messy side of student leadership. This is just my own opinion, take it or leave it. I think that if you're in a ministry right now, whoever's on the other side of this, if you're in a ministry where you can't split middle school and high school, I would really recommend that you don't have your high school students leading middle school groups. Unless you're able to do what you were just explaining, Brent, of like what Russell was able to do and like have essentially a small group just for those leaders who are doing that. I really wouldn't recommend doing that. As awesome as it is for students to be able to serve and like being able to lead a group, don't create competing systems for yourself.
No.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes, like some of the best leaders I know, that was how they knew they were supposed to go into ministry. But I think more often than not, it leads to burnout. And it leads to students not being able to know who they are. And again, I'll take a little bit of pressure off ourselves a little bit. It's not like we're the end all be all for like a student's spirituality, but for a lot of students, what we talk about on a Sunday night or a Wednesday night is all they ever hear or think about when it comes to Jesus. So let's not take advantage of that. Let's not create competing systems where students have to choose between serving and listening and learning.
Yeah.
Let's create areas where they can do both, or at least choose the one that's most appropriate for them. So,
yeah, without a doubt. No, that's great stuff. Because I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, our job is that next step. And if they are missing out their opportunities to grow in their faith because they're using what they know already to serve other people, then we're missing the mark completely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on, for pastors that are currently struggling with maybe building or starting a student leadership team, are there any resources that you'd recommend?
Hey, I'm in the same boat as you right now, if that's you. I'm also building a student leadership program, so I get it. Student Leadership University has some really good resources. I think they're owned by Lifeway now. They've got some killer stuff. They've got some like retreats that they're able to give and provide for students. And they've got like a curriculum that you can walk students through. Leader Treks also, I mean, like if you're a DYM person, you get a lot of Leader Trek stuff for free with your subscription, but Leader Treks has some really, really good stuff as well. I mean, I've used them before. And then a lot of like, when I think about like more bigger picture of like student leadership, for me, a lot of that's been influenced by Growing Young, pretty much anything with Fuller Youth Institute's name on it, whether that's Sticky Faith or Growing Young. That's a big part of what I do when I think about student leadership, from more of a philosophical level. But yeah, if you're looking for like the everyday, like in the trenches stuff, I would definitely recommend Leader Treks and Student Leadership University. Those are both really good resources.
I will second Leader Treks. I've used it for a long time. I love their stuff, and if you do have a download youth ministry subscription, which is like $20 a month, you get that $20 credit back in store credit. And then on top of that, like you get like 8 freebies every month. And one of them is a leadership development thing from Leader Treks. And it's geared towards student ministry. It's geared towards student leadership. And it's fantastic. We used to do a once a month student leadership meeting after our Wednesday night services were done, and the leaders just stayed, and like that's literally what we did. We just went through a Leader Treks lesson once a month, and it's fantastic. The kids are engaged, they dive into it because they're really, really well written. Mm-hmm. They change as far as like what they're covering. Like they cover such a broad expanse of like what being a leader means and what being a leader can do for you, and then how a leader responds, behaves, interacts. Like there's so much stuff that like is great about Leader Treks. Like they are seriously one of my top resources I've ever used.
For sure. And I would also recommend anytime that you're able to go to a conference, like whether it's NYWC or whatever, there's normally a few gold nuggets of like workshops that have either folks from Leader Treks or people talking student leadership. Those have always been super beneficial for me. Also, pro tip, if you go to NYWC or any other conference, always buy the recordings if they have recordings of workshops. Always do it.
Totally worth it.
It might be an extra $150, but it is worth it for days. I still reference like there was a like one very particular workshop that I listened to that I was present for when NYWC was in St. Louis a few years back. It was talking about like disability ministry and special needs ministry and student ministry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I still reference that. I still go back to it all the time.
That was Marv Penner, wasn't it?
I think it was Megan something. I don't remember who it was exactly.
Okay. Yeah. I was at that National Youth Workers Convention, and my wife is a special education teacher, and like she went and she absolutely ate that one up. She thought it was so cool. But yeah, no, definitely get the downloads. And the thing is like, there's a lot of things that are like, oh, well, yeah, my church can't afford to drop $500, $600, $700 for me to go to this like fancy 4-day conference kind of thing like that. There's so many different opportunities. Speaking of Kenny and Elle again, with stuff you can use, they have Grow, and now they have their Grow conference that they do every year. That is, I believe, free.
Every year it's free.
Every year. Then we've had a couple different ones. I noticed one this year. Youth Pastor Co. started doing one as well. And so it'll be interesting to see what they develop and put out for the next couple of years. And all these things are free. But then another one that I used to go to is, I believe, from Student Leadership University, and it's SLU Lead.
Yep.
And that one costs like $10, I think. So it's super, super cheap. You might have to pay for a hotel room and drive a little bit, but like it's
split Airbnb, man. It was funny. I was going to go to that one. It was I think it was Youth Pastor Summit in Dallas.
Yeah, Youth Pastor Summit. That's what it is.
It's from that organization of Student Leadership University, right? They were going to have one in Dallas, Texas in April of last year. And we all know how that turned out. I had like all the other youth pastors in town, like with me, like we had like a group of 4 of us who were like super tight, and like we had an Airbnb reserved. And like we were going to like bro down for the whole week, and it got canceled. It was a major bummer, but yeah, $10, you can't beat it. It's so good. There's resources and there's opportunities for you to grow and connect with people across the board.
Find ways to connect with even like in all the Facebook groups that are all over student ministry, with Download Youth Ministries and then youthmin.org and stuff you can use. There's so many different groups that you can plug in and ask questions and like speak to people that have more experience. And Absolutely. That is a great, great opportunity. And it's a great resource. So and then we are kind of wrapping up. So I'll give you like a last kind of closing bit if you have any other knowledge to drop on us. And then you can end with, how can people connect with you on social media? If you want to shamelessly plug anything that you're currently working on, etc., you go for it.
Man, I was always told to be afraid of the open mic in student ministry, and you just made that mistake of just like saying, Daniel, talk about whatever you want. But that's okay, because I actually don't have a ton of stuff to talk about. But hey, if you want to connect, I'm always down. You can friend me on Facebook. It's weird. I'm like 25, and Facebook is still like my number one social platform. I haven't crossed over into like true Gen Z millennial, like zillennial. I'm on everything. Like you can find me anywhere, but it's still like, it's funny that Facebook is like the most boomer of social platforms, but it's still the one that I use most. You can check that out.
Facebook is the best.
You can also feel free to check out like what our student ministry is doing. We don't have an incredible online presence, but we're working on it. And like I don't know, I think it's really easy for folks, myself included, before I started working here, to like see a multi-site church. And like if you say like, hey, I work in a multi-site church, people just assume that like you're knocking it out everywhere. It's like, dude, we're just as messy as any church. The only difference is that we have four other people on my team who are also just as messy. So it just works like that. But yeah, if you want to follow anything that we're doing, we're Harbor students. And then like I work at Fairhaven Church, which is just one of our campuses. So you can follow anything that we're doing, Harbor students at Fairhaven. But yeah, that's the majority of stuff I do. Yeah, would love to, if you want me on your podcast in the future, I'm always down. I like recording and I like talking. You can also hit me up on Clubhouse, because that's how we got connected, Brent and I and Russell. I love hosting rooms on there. Not as consistent as I would like on Wednesday nights to host a post youth group detox. But you're more than welcome to jump in that room if you're on there. I also help with Tim Sinan, who's a youth pastor out in North Carolina. We are big admins on Clubhouse for the youth ministry club, which sounds more interesting than it actually is, but feel free to jump in that if you're a Clubhouse folk. But yeah, feel free to connect. I'd love to talk anything with you, whether it's online ministry or student ministry or student leadership or whatever. I'm kind of an open book. So that's all I got for you, Brent. I don't know if I have anything else super interesting going on.
All right, man. Yeah. Well, from what I've heard, he's also a barbecue enthusiast, which makes him okay with me.
If you want to talk barbecue, I'm always down. Or just if you want to talk just like cooking in general, like I'm all about it. This Sunday, because it's Easter, we're recording this right before Easter. It is Good Friday today. I guess that's the first time I've been able to say that. It's Good Friday today. It ain't good. But this Sunday, I'm planning to make some ribeyes on my stove here.
There you go.
I've learned to make a mean pan steak, so that's the plan.
I've gotten to the point where it's hard to beat a pan seared steak. Like it's real good.
Oh my gosh! Like I've been converted. I have a pellet grill. I can't use it right now. I live in an apartment, but like I have a pellet grill, and I thought like that was the pinnacle of steaks. And then I realized that the key to making a good steak is pretty much just use an entire cup of butter. Like that's what makes it delicious. It's like, and you can do that when you're in a pan.
Yep, pretty much. No, that's great. Well, like I said, if as we close, if you do want to catch up with Daniel, be sure to check him out on Facebook, because that's the primary boomer thing that he still uses. And we'll go from there. As always, we love you guys and we want to hear from you. And so if you have any questions or if you have any comments on this, please reach out to us and stay tuned for the next episode. See y'all later.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed that conversation and that it inspired you and encouraged you and gives you some tools that you can use as you continue to pour into the lives of your students.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, we would ask that you leave a comment or a rating on whatever platform you're listening to us on. We would appreciate that so much. It helps our podcast out. It helps us climb the ratings, and then it gets more people on board to listen to the content that we have. So also maybe you would know someone that would benefit from this conversation. Take a moment and share this on social media and tag them. And then also tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And so Russell, you have next week's interview in the 4th episode of our podcast, man. So tell us a little bit about your conversation next week.
So yes, next week we're talking with Kate Garnes, and Kate is someone I met through the Clubhouse app. And so it was a great conversation with her. She started off in Disney and doing work with shows and choreography and a lot of stuff working with Disney for about 10 years. And then she lost her job at Disney, and she is now a motivational speaker for students. And she goes all over doing motivational talks. We talk about her book. She has one that she finished called Mixtape, which talks about the fact that you have things that you've been told in your past that stick with you, things that you've said you can't do this, or you're not smart enough for this, or whatever it is, and how to rewrite that tape and how to make it into something that motivates you instead of hold you down. And we also talk about a project she is working on, a book on joy. She felt God calling her to share about joy and being joyful, and she said yes. And then, well, I better let her tell you in her own words. So here's a short clip from next week's interview.
But in September of 2020, God put on my heart, you're going to write a book about joy. And I said, oh, let's go. Let's do it. I love joy. I'm so joyful. And within a week of him laying that on my heart, I found out that I was being laid off from my 10-year job with Disney. The gym that I was working at closed. A bunch of my friends got sick from COVID. Just so bad. Everything happened at once. And I felt God go, oh, did I not mention? Did I not mention that you're going to write this book about joy from the lowest place you've ever been in your life? Did I leave that part out?
Man, that's good. We're definitely looking forward to that. Just one more reminder, please be sure to go to studentministryconversations.org for show notes and links from this episode, which was episode 003. Just search for this week's episode number in the search bar and it'll pull you right to it. We also have other helpful articles and posts as well. Also, if you happen to be on the Clubhouse app, like Russell mentioned at the beginning of this episode, look for our rooms in the Student Ministry Convos Club on Monday afternoon and Thursday mornings. We would love to connect with you on there. And who knows, you might be one of our guests on a podcast episode in the future, as we've met many of our podcast guests through Clubhouse. And so again, thank you for joining us for this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.